Hey everyone, here is how to make this crochet wavy button-up top. I'm making it in a size small, but it's easily adjustable for size, and I show you how to do that in the video, as well as provide centimeter and inch measurements. The most complicated thing about this top is the stitch, so if you get that down, I think it's fairly doable for beginners. If you have any questions, please leave them below and I'll try to get back to you. For this project, I used just over 150 grams of 8-ply cotton yarn in 3 different colours. I ended up using more of the white yarn because I chose to do the trim in that colour, and you could also use any number of colours that you want, less or more than 3 would work. You'll also need a 3mm hook, scissors, measuring tape, stitch markers, a darning needle and some buttons.
So to start, you're going to grab your first colour and your hook. I'm using a 3mm hook, and you'll need to make a slip knot, insert your hook, and now we're going to do our foundation chain. This is the number of chains that you'll need to do depending on the size that you're making, as well as the centimeter and inch measurements. For me, I'm making a size small, so I'm going to chain up 147. This chain is very long because we are making the top in one panel, so this essentially has to go all the way around your body. If you're using the centimeter and inch measurements, try to keep your chains in groups of 3 if you can. The pattern is worked in 3, so it'll just be easier if it's a 3, but if that doesn't work out, I will show you what to do. I have 147 chains now. So once you have finished that chain, this is the same as the number of stitches that you will have in this bottom section of the top. So we're going to do a couple of extra chains to turn around, but we won't be stitching into these. So now I'm going to chain up 2 more. So 1 and 2, and I'm going to stitch into that 3rd chain from the hook. So that last chain that we did, I'm going to do a double crochet. So to do that, you need to yarn over, insert into that 3rd chain from the hook, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through the remaining 2 loops. So we're going to do that again, yarn over, insert into that next chain down, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, and yarn over, pull through 2. Okay, one more time, I'm going to yarn over into that next stitch, and we're going to do our 3rd double crochet. So that's 3. Those 2 chains that we did at the start are not going to count as a stitch, and as we go, all of the chains that we do to turn around are not going to count as a stitch, so we won't be stitching into those. So now for the next part of the pattern is going to be 3 single crochets. So to do a single crochet, you just insert into that next chain, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through the 2 loops on the hook. So I'll show you that again. Insert into that next chain along, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2. And we'll do 1 more single crochet into that next stitch, completing our group of 3. So now we're just going to go down this entire row, alternating between 3 double crochets and 3 single crochets. So I'm back up to my double crochets. So now I'm going to do 3 double crochets into those next 3 chains. And then we will do 3 single crochets into the next after that. So now I've got 1, 2, and 3. So now you just need to keep repeating this pattern until you've made it all the way down to the other end, and you should have the same number of stitches that you did chain. So join back in when you get to the end. I'm just doing my last couple of stitches, and you should end on a group of 3. If you did use the centimeter and inch measurements and you didn't end on a 3, you ended on a, say, a 2, you'll just have to make sure that on top of this, for every other row, you're also only doing 2. So don't follow the pattern of groups of 3. Make sure this one is always 2. Otherwise, it'll mess up the rest of the pattern. Okay, so this is essentially a 4-row repeat. So for the next row, we're going to do the exact same thing that we just did for this row. So I'm going to start by chaining up 2.
Because I ended on a double crochet. If you ended on a single, just do 1 chain.
Turn around and you can see that in the previous row we did double crochets, so now I'm going to do double crochets again. We're putting the same stitch into the stitch of the previous row. So I'm going to go ahead and do a double crochet, and into the next 2 stitches I'm going to do a double crochet. So we've got our 3 double crochets. So into those next 3 stitches, the previous row has single crochets, so I'm going to do single crochets. So now I've got 1, 2, and 3, and we're back to our doubles, and we're doing those into the doubles of the previous row. So you can just go ahead, continue all the way down this row, making sure to use the same stitch that's in the previous row in this current row. Join back in when you get to the end. So I'm just doing my last couple of stitches. Now for this next row, we're going to need to change colors, and I need to do that halfway through my last stitch of the row. I've got the turning chains from when we started over here, but we won't be stitching into the turning chains. They're not counting as a stitch. So I'm going to grab my next color, and to swap colors, you'll just need to do the first half of a stitch. So if you're swapping colors with a double crochet, you'll need to yarn over, insert into that stitch, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through the first 2, and now I'm going to hold that one down nice and secure. I'm just holding it on the other side, and I'm going to grab the end of my next color, hold that with that one, and I'm going to pull the new color through the last 2 loops to finish the double crochet. So there we go, and now I'm going to chain up 1. So now we've joined on with our new color. If you wanted to do more than 2 rows per color, you could keep going with the same color, but just make sure that you're treating every group of 2 as a new color for the purposes of this pattern. So if I use the dark blue again, I have to pretend that it was a new color so that I was doing the right stitches. If your last stitch is a single crochet and you're going to be color changing with the single, then it's much the same as the double crochet, but you're going to insert into that last stitch like you normally would with a single, yarn over and pull through, and now we're going to pull the new color through these 2 loops. So I'm going to hold the color that I'm using down and grab my other color. If this was the first time you're using that color, then like the double, you would just hold the tail down while you did this, but if you're continuing with the colors and you haven't cut them off, then you'll just grab it from here, pull it through, and I'm going to chain up 2 because I know that my next row will be double crochets. So chain up 2, and then I'm good to start my double crochets for the next row. So for this next row, we only need to chain up 1 because we're going to be starting with single crochets. So I'm going to turn around. Now because I've got that new color, I'm going to do the opposite stitch from the previous row. So the previous row, we had double crochets in the first 3 stitches. So now I'm going to do single crochets into the first 3 stitches. So just like the rest of the pattern, I'm going to follow along doing groups of 3 stitches. And the next 3 stitches along in the previous row, they're single crochets, so I'm going to be doing double crochets. So into those next 3, and now you just need to go down the rest of the row, continuing with this pattern of 3 double crochets and 3 single crochets, making sure to do the opposite stitch from the previous row. And it is pretty noticeable if you've done the wrong stitch, so hopefully that helps you keep track of where you're up to. So now you can continue this pattern until you get to the end of the row, and I will show you how to turn around and start the next row, and then we will do another color change. So I'm just doing my last couple of stitches, and because the next row is going to be matching the stitches that we just did in this row, I know I'm going to do single crochets, so I only need to chain up once. So chain 1, turn around. So because this is our second row with the new color, we're going to be matching the stitches from the previous row. So I've got my 3 single crochets there, so I'm going to do 3 single crochets. This is exactly the same as what we did with that first navy row. The first row of a new color is the opposite stitch, and the second row of the new color is the same stitch. So now the previous row has double crochets, so I'm going to do double crochets. And you can just continue down the rest of the row with this pattern. And once you reach the end, you can swap over to your new color. So continue with this pattern of rows until you reach this many rows or this many centimeter and inch measurements if you're using a different size hook and yarn. For me, making a size small, I'm going to keep swapping colors every 2 rows until I reach row 22. You can swap colors at whatever rate you want. You could do every row different color, but you have to keep the pattern of the first row is 1 stitch, the second row is the same, the third is opposite, the fourth is the same, the fifth is opposite, the sixth is the same. So just continue with that pattern until you have reached the end of this bottom section.
This is the order of the colors that I used if you want to do the same.
So now I've made it up to the end, and I'm just going to do another color change into my next color. So now we're going to get started on the section where we're going to be decreasing the back so that the front will come up higher than the back will come up. If you don't want to do this, you can just keep going back and forward with the straight rows and have more of a bandeau straight around top. But if you want the front to be a bit shaped, we're going to do a bit of manipulation here.
For the rest of the top, it doesn't matter which colors you use and where, but for this next row, it needs to be the same color that we're then going to use again in 8 rows. So just keep that in mind. I'll tell you when we're going to need to use that same color. You'll be able to do all the rows in between with whichever colors you want. It's just this row and then 8 rows from now, which will only be the 4 colors if you're also grouping your 2 rows together.
Okay, so for this row, we're going to stitch into the first section, which is kind of going to make up 1/2 of the front panel. For me, making a size small, I'm going to stitch into the first 36 stitches, but this is how many stitches you'll be stitching into, or the centimeter and inch measurements. I'm going to go ahead and count that and put in a stitch marker, and then we can stitch up to it. So the end of this lot of 3 single crochets is going to be my 36th stitch. So now, following the pattern of all the other rows, I've got my doubles in those previous 2 rows for those stitches, so I'm going to go back to singles and continue along until I get to the stitch marker and then join back in. And I'm just doing my last 3 stitches till I get up to my stitch marker. And now we're just going to turn around, so we're going to ignore the rest of the stitches there, and I'm going to chain up 2 because I'm doing double crochets, and if you're doing single crochets for your next stitch, you'll just chain up 1 and go back to the regular pattern. So now you're going to go ahead continuing with the pattern, only building up this one section. So you can see we're only going to be building up, it's about 1/3 of the top. So continue this for this many rows, depending on your size. The numbers on the screen is including this first short row. So for me, I'm going to be doing 8 rows, but if I am counting from where I'm currently up to, then that would be 7 rows. So once you get there, join back in and I'll show you the next bit. Okay, so I've made it to the end of that section, and this next color that we join on is the one that needs to be the same as when we started this section. So I'm going to join on my light blue and chain up 1 as normal because I'll be doing single crochets first. And I'm going to go along this row as normal, but when I get to the end of this row, we're not going to turn around. So once you've gotten to the end, join back in and I will show you how to finish off this row. So now I'm just doing my last 3 stitches
And now this is going to be a bit of a trust the process situation. So you're going to fold where you are up to now to where you stopped stitching into this row, and we're going to start stitching into the row. So I'm going to fold this down here, and that next stitch is a single crochet because the previous rows were double crochets. So I'm going to put a single crochet into that stitch, and then the next two as normal. And now I'm going to continue with the pattern, and I'm going to go back to my doubles all the way until you get to the end. So join back in when you get to the very end of this row. So it's going to look a bit like that. And we can fix this later if you want to stitch it down. We can stitch it down like that so that it sits nice and flat. So join back in at the end of this row. So I've made it to the end of that row, and I'm going to chain up one as normal. And now what we're going to do is the same thing that we did on the other side. So however many stitches you counted in and put in your stitch marker and stitch to that on the other side, we're now going to do on this side. So this is the number of stitches as well as the centimeter and inch measurements, but just copy what you did on the other side. I'm going to count 36. And so now, just like we did on the other side, you're going to stitch all the way until you get to that point, and then we're going to continue up for the next few rows. I'm just up to my last few stitches. And like we did for the other side, when you get to the end, we are going to turn around and go back, but we're going to have to do a color change because this is our second row with this color. So I'm going to check what my second color was over here, and that was white. So the idea would be to match it with what you did on the other side, though you definitely don't have to do that. That's what I'm going to do. So that means I need to join on with my white. And if you only have one ball, you can cut it off, or if you have multiple balls, just grab some of the same color. And I'm going to join on and single crochet. Keep doing the regular pattern of the rows until you get up to where you were on the other side. So this is how many rows or centimeter and inches that you'll need to do, but just copy what you did on the other side until you get up to the row before you did this, and then join back in. So you should have made it to the end of those rows that you needed to do. So I've done that first row with the blue that we are gonna then bring across to the other side. So now we're gonna do exactly what we did on the other side here, and we're gonna go all the way along and back to the top, and then it'll all be joined back together as one piece. So I'm going to turn around as normal and continue down the rest of this row until I get to the end, and then we will join down like we did on the other side, and then I will show you the join again, and then we can just continue on with the pattern. And now we are going to stitch into that next stitch from the section where we left off. So that stitch there is a single crochet, so I'm going to be doing a single crochet into it. So I'm just going to fold this over and do a single crochet. So now I'm going to keep going down the rest of the row following the stitch pattern, and when we get to the next join where we joined on the other side, you're just going to keep going with the stitches. Join back in if you want to see how to do that, but we're just going to keep stitching all the way up until we get to the other end. If your folds have popped through on a different side, on the opposite side to each other, you can just push it through. It doesn't really matter at this point what side it's on, because you can work out at the end which side you want to be the inside and the outside. So keep going until you get to that join, and then we're going to continue on from there. I've almost made it up to the join, and I'm just doing my 3 stitches before, and then I'm going to continue on as normal. That one's a double crochet, which is what it should be in the sequence. So now you just have to continue doing the stitch pattern as normal until you have done this many more rows or this many centimeters and inches. So for me, making a size small,
After I finish this row,
I'm going to do 5 more rows and then a half row. So I have finished those next 5 rows. I chose to do just 1 row of the white at the end, but you can definitely just add another row and finish it with the waves if you wanted to, but I wanted it to be flat at the top. So it's looking like this so far. So we've got our front piece, the back piece, and the other front piece all together. So no sewing on, which is great. And now I'm just going to get started on the trim for the sides of the front. So this will be kind of in the middle front. There also isn't really a front and a back, but you might have a preference with how the stitches look. Like, for example, I like this side of the stitches a little bit better than the other side, but you can pick which side you like best. There's no difference. If this is hanging out on the side that you like, you just pop it through to the other side. So you can pick whichever one you like, but I'm going to be basing it on having this be the outside. So I'll be doing my trim from the top to the bottom here so that it's facing the same way, and it's going to go from the bottom to the top up here to make sure that the stitches are on the outside. I'm going to stick with the white that I'm currently working with, but if you wanted to change color, we would do it in the exact same way that we change color for the rows. So you would just go to halfway through that last stitch, grab your other color and join it on here, and then follow the next part that I'm doing, but I'm going to stick with the same color. So I'm going to keep the white on, and now I'm going to chain up 2. I'm also just going to jump in here to show you the buttons in case you want to be doing the buttons on this first trim that we do. So you can do it on either side. It just means that whichever side you put the buttonholes in is going to be on top of the other one. So if you wanted to put the buttonholes in this first side that you're doing, you'll need to start your buttonholes right at the top. So I'm just going to jump in and show you the buttonholes first so that you don't get too far having done it without the buttonholes. So for me, for my buttons, I actually don't need to leave any buttonholes. I've got these tiny little white ones that I'm going to use, and these fit through the double crochets. So I am going to be stitching the buttons onto one side of my trim, and I'm just going to need to pop them through the other side. I don't need to leave a bigger hole than that. If you don't have tiny little buttons and you want to use bigger buttons, then this is the way that I like to do buttonholes, is that you will finish your previous stitch as normal, and if you want your buttonhole to be here, we're just going to chain up 1, skip where we would have put that stitch. So I'm not going to stitch into the upper part of this double crochet. I'm going to only go into the lower part of the double crochet, so skipping one of my doubles, and then I can continue on with my regular placement of double crochets. And then if you want to leave another buttonhole, you'll just do the same thing, chain up 1, skip where you would have put that double crochet, and move on to the next one. It's a good idea to try it on before you make your buttonholes. So if you wanted to leave buttonholes in specific spots, I would recommend trying on before you do the trim. I'm going to try it on after I've done the trim because, like I said, I'm not actually going to be leaving any designated buttonholes. I'm just going to be popping them through the double crochets. So if this is you, jump to this timestamp where I try it on and show you how to position the buttons. If you're doing the same as me and you have little tiny buttons, then continue on just doing double crochets, and you don't need to leave buttonholes. Don't worry about this little part here. And jumping back to the start of the trim, so rather than going back along here like we've been doing, I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to go down the side. I'm going to put 2 double crochets into each double crochet and 1 double crochet into each single crochet of the rows. So you can see here I've got my double crochet, so I put 2 stitches into this white one here. These are singles, so I just put 1 into the top row of the blue and 1 into the bottom row of the blue. Then back to the doubles, I put 2 in this top row of the dark blue and then 2 in the next row. So to do that, I'm going to do my first double crochet into the white, and then another double crochet into the white as well. And then into that next one, I'm going to put 1 in this row and 1 in the next row. Now I'm back to putting 2 in this next edge. There's no exact spot for you to put the stitches because it is the edge of the row rather than the top. So just find the best spot. So now I'm going to go all the way down, and if you had done this, if you added another row here and you ended up on the other side, it would be the exact same thing. You'll just be facing the other way. And then we're going to come around and I'm going to add ribbing to this side as well, except I'm going to start from the bottom so that the stitches face the same way, but they're not going to look that different. So just whatever way you do the first one, we'll start on the other side at the bottom. So if you started on the top of this one, we'd start on the bottom of this one, and vice versa. So I'm just going to go ahead until I finish this row, and I will show you how to finish it off. Okay, so I'm just doing my last stitch in this row, and it's looking like this now. If you want to do what I did at the top and have just 1 row of the white at the bottom, you could do that too, stitching into the chains, and it'll give you the same effect. It'll make the bottom flat across the bottom, but I wanted the bottom to be dark like this, so I'm going to leave it. I'm just going to chain up 1, pull a tail, and then cut my yarn. And now we're going to get started on doing the same thing on the other side, and I'm just going to need to make sure that I'm catching all of the loose yarn. Now to start on the trim for the other side, and you may have done this one first, I'm going to join the yarn on to the very bottom, and I'm going to do the same thing that I did on the other side. Into all the double crochets, I'll be putting 2 double crochets, and into all of the single crochet ends, I'll be putting 1 double crochet. So to start, I'm going to insert my hook into the bottom of that last stitch, try and go into the chains, and I'm going to pull my yarn through and chain up 2 to be the height of a double crochet. So there we go. And now I'm going to start by putting 2 double crochets into the end of this row because it was a double crochet at the end. So you'll just need to keep going exactly the same as what we did on the other side of the trim. The only difference for this side is that we have those extra little pieces of yarn that are hanging around. So try and capture as many of them as you can. Any of the ones that are hanging loose, you can use a darning needle to sew back in later if you don't want to try and catch it now. But otherwise, just try to make sure that you're always capturing these loops. So I wouldn't want to be pulling the loop forward and going in above it. Make sure that the loop is also under your hook when you insert it into the stitches. I'm just going to keep going down the row, making sure that I'm capturing all of those loose bits of yarn. So you can see on the front of this section, you can't see where that loose piece of yarn was, and if you flip it over, you can't see where it was on the back. Go ahead until you get up to the other end and join back in, and then we're going to try it on, work out where we want our straps and our buttons to sit. And I'm just doing my last stitch into the top of that chain row from that very top row. So I've gone all the way up to the very top, and I'm just going to chain up and pull the tail and cut off my yarn. So now I'm going to try it on and work out where I want my buttons to be and where I want my straps to sit. So I'm going to use stitch markers to hold it together. But if you already know where your buttons are, you could do the buttons first and then try it on and work out where your straps are going to go. So I've got 5 stitch markers in here holding it up, and I definitely think I need 5 buttons. I may even do 6. So this is kind of why I tried it on, because with some people, if it's loose enough, you might only need 3 buttons. But if it's a little bit more fitted, like mine is, I needed a couple extra buttons to make sure that it's not going to gape. So now working out where I want to put the straps. I don't want them to be too close in. I'd rather them be towards the outside. So I think that if I start them on the outside here and then have them come in a little bit, a little bit less than these ones, then that'll be about right. So I'm going to put in a stitch marker from about where I want it to start on the outside. So from about there, and I will go back and measure and make sure that it's starting from the same stitch on both sides. This is just to give me an idea of where I want it to start. I have sewed on 4 of my buttons, and I'm just going to put one more up here. I'll just show you how I do it, but it's a pretty standard way of sewing on buttons, so if you already know how to do that, you can just skip ahead. I'm going to be putting this one pretty much as close to the top as I can. This is the white yarn that I used to make the top, but I split it up to just be taking one strand of the yarn, so it's, I think there was 5 strands in here, so I've just taken one of the strands out so that I can fit it through like a regular sewing needle as opposed to a darning needle. And I'm just going to insert that into the top, and then I'm going to go through the button and making sure that I leave enough of a tail, because I like to tie it in a knot at the end. But you don't have to do that if that's not how you like to do it. And then stitch it through. Alright, so now I'm just going to go ahead and put a couple more stitches in the button to secure it, trying to make sure to space out where I'm putting those stitches in the top. I don't want them to be coming through the same spot and pulling on the same spot, so making sure to move them around a bit and try to split the fibers of the yarn that I used as well. And now I'm just going to tie the tails in a knot, well, in a couple of knots, just to make sure it's nice and secure, and then you can weave your ends in. And you could use a darning needle or a sewing needle to weave your ends in, whichever you prefer. There we go. So now I will be able to do my top up. So now we're going to get started on the straps, and I have designed them to be 1 row of a color on the outside, similar to what we did at the top, where we stopped kind of halfway through a color change and just did the 1 row. So it's like that, and then the full 2 colors on the inside. So we'll be doing 4 rows in total for the arm straps, but you could definitely do less or more than that. You could just keep going with the pattern, but this is what I've done, and I just picked the colors that I thought would look the best. So you can pick any of the colors that you have in your top. So we're going to start from the outside. So I'm going to grab my light blue. So we're going to start with a chain. This is how many chains you will need to do depending on the size that you're making, as well as the centimeter and inch measurements. For me, making a size small, I'm going to chain up 69. Okay, so I have got my chain, and I'm going to start the same way that I started at the top. I'm going to start with the double crochets, but you can definitely start with the singles if you prefer. So to start with the doubles, I'm going to chain up 2 and use those as my turning chains. So in the 3rd chain from the hook, I'm going to do my first double crochet. So just like we did for the body of the top, I'm going to do 3 double crochets, and then I'm going to do my 3 singles and continue the pattern of 3 of each stitch going all the way down, just like we did for our top. So I've got my 3 doubles, now 3 singles, and this is essentially going to be identical to the bottom of your top. It's just a different length. So you can go ahead and do your 4 rows, and when I get to the end of this row, I'm going to change colors for the next 2 rows, and then I'm going to change back to the light blue again for that last row. So I've made it to the end of that row, and I'm just doing my last stitch. I'm going to swap colors now. So I'm just going to grab my white, and just doing what we did for the top, I'm halfway through that double crochet, so it's all identical. I'm going to hold down the blue and pull through my white instead. So exactly the same as we've already done. Now I'm going to chain up 1 because those were double crochets, and I'm swapping color and I want it to be a color and rhythm change, so I'm going to go onto the single crochets rather than doing doubles again like we did for the top. So I'm going to start on my single crochets, and for the rest of this row I'm going to do the opposite of what is in the previous row, so just like a regular color change, except that I've only got 1 row of the light blue. So go ahead continuing with this pattern until you have done your 4 rows, or as many centimeter and inches as you need to do. So the next row is going to be doing the same stitch as the previous row, and then the final row following that is going to go back to doing the opposite stitch, and that will give us this wavy pattern with straight edges. So join back in when you've finished your strap and I will show you how to join it on. Once you have finished your strap, you can just pull up a loop and cut a tail. If you want to, you can leave this tail long enough to be able to stitch your strap on. I think I'm going to use the white yarn to sew it on because the top of my top is white, but you can use whatever color you like. If you measured where your straps are going to go, you can just stitch them on now, but if you want to use the same kind of ratio distance that I've used, this is how many stitches you need to count from the first stitch in the middle to the outside of where our strap is going to go. So for me, that's 24 stitches. And then also counting for the back strap over here, I've also counted it from the front, and this is how many stitches as well as a centimeter and inches to count for the back of your strap. So for your front, work out which way you want it to face, and for the strap that I've already stitched on, this is where the chain is here on the outside, so I'm going to put the chain on the outside of this one as well. So I want it to face this way, and I'm going to put this on the top. So the stitch markers, the stitches that I've counted in is for the outside of the strap. So you'll line up the outside of where your strap is going to go with that stitch marker or that stitch that you counted, and then we're going to put it around the back, and that's also measuring for the outside. So this is like the shoulder, this bit's closest to the shoulder. So making sure it's not twisted. Grab whatever yarn you want to use to sew on your strap. I'm using white. I am going to flip the top to the inside out and put the strap on the inside. So I'm going to try and go mostly through this white layer here so that you can't see the yarn, but if I need to do a few stitches further down, I can also just use my blue tails to do that. So I'm just going to weave through the stitches and through my strap, and I'm going to stitch it kind of up the side so that it doesn't flip around, and then I'm going to go across where the top is and just check. Yep, it's not super visible, which is what I wanted. And then once you've done that, you can weave in your ends. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch on the front part, and then the very last thing that we need to do is stitch down this section, which I've already stitched this section down so you can see that there's no hole there anymore. So on the other side, that's what it was looking like, and you can flip this all the way up if you want, or all the way down, or you can split the difference and have a little bit of a bunch on either side, which is what I'm going to do. But if you wanted to try it on and decide which one you think looks the best on you, this one is probably the flattest one though. So, and I'm just going to come in from the back and put a couple of stitches through this to close up the hole. And then once you've done that, you can just weave in your ends. And then that's it for the top. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you found it useful. If you feel like it, please consider hitting that like button and the subscribe button. See you in the next one.